On this episode of Militaria at the Museum, we'll view a beautiful collection of Japanese swords, including one of the most iconic sword types in the world. After that, we'll gain special access to board a Flower-class corvette warship and get a closer look at a forward-throwing anti-submarine weapon. Lastly, we'll hear about how a famous Canadian author retrieved one of the most feared weapons of World War II. Beyond museum exhibits lies a hidden realm of archived artifacts that hold the keys to unlocking intriguing stories from the past. Come along as I meet with experts at the Army, Naval, and Aviation museums, where I've been granted special access to pull back the curtains and reveal the secrets of their Militaria. My name is Sandy Hiltz, and all my life I've been captivated by military history. Now, I have the rare opportunity to explore a collection of fascinating military artifacts on Militaria at the Museum. At the Army Museum, Kevin Robbins is taking me into the archives to see some exclusive Japanese swords in the style of those once used by the samurai of early modern Japan. I'm interested in unlocking the story behind these iconic swords and what significance they had to the samurai who wielded them. Kevin, I understand you have a 17th century katana here at the museum.
Yes, we have one here in the storage area.
We're a bit spoiled for choice for things to look at in here, aren't we, Kevin?
Oh, there's no shortage of items here. The katana is probably one of the most iconic, easily recognized swords in history in many ways. So it is the preferred sword of samurai. Samurai in Japanese means they who serve.
How did this sword come to be at the museum, Kevin?
This was purchased in the late 1870s by a minister from Nova Scotia who was doing Christian missionary work in Japan. He bought a suit of armor and this katana in a junk shop and brought it back to Nova Scotia. Katanas are exceptionally well made in terms of their production, the length of time and the technique of folding metal to make it an incredibly strong, the cooling system, laying it on clay so that it hardens at a certain temperature, giving it a great lightness and quickness of a blade, but at the same time, an amazing tensile strength. They become so synonymous with the samurai warrior.
Kevin, I understand that the samurai would carry a pair of swords. What can you tell me about that?
Samurai were the only people allowed to carry a match set, a long sword, the katana, and a shorter sword called the wakasuche. Now, a lot of people in Japan would have short swords and different weapons and things like that, but the match set is only worn by the samurai. It's a visual symbol of the samurai, their role of an elite class within Imperial Japan up until about 1867.
What would eventually become of the samurai, Kevin?
After the date of 1867, samurai are no longer allowed to walk the streets of Japanese communities. They have to cut their hair. They're not allowed to wear the sort of traditional armor and clothing that they were renowned for. Many samurai will literally just become almost homeless in some cases, hence the fact that one individual amongst thousands had sold his armor and was purchased by an Anglican minister like a decade later. But as a class, a distinctive class, of warrior class within Japan, the samurai no longer really exist. By 1867, you're starting then to see literally a state-run army, as opposed to the samurai being the warrior class and dealing with the conflicts within the Japanese nation or state. And again, you have a modern, westernized, state-run army. So there is no place now for the samurai given their traditional role. So again, the sword is representative of a period in Japanese history when samurai represent the sort of military class of Imperial Japan, and again becomes equally synonymous in the 20th century with the advent of Imperial Japan and a sense of growing Japanese nationalism leading towards World War II. So within this period of prior to World War II, you have a rise of Japanese sort of nationalism. So with that, you'll see the use of samurai imagery, a period of what is known within samurai history as the period of false Bushido.
So what we're looking at here are false Bushido katana. Is that correct, Kevin?
These are swords made in the fashion of a katana. So by type, they are katanas, but these aren't samurai katanas. These are made under contract, manufactured in factories for the Japanese Imperial Army. So these swords are issued prior to the Second World War. So when the Japanese Army, Imperial Army goes into China in the 1930s, you have young officers are carrying a higher grade. You can see they go to the point of trying to, again, emulate the sword. So you have the billowing cloud, or what's known as the Wuhan, on this sword. Now below it, again, you can see it here in the reflection of this sort of stylized lacing and whatnot that you see on the officer sword. This is a non-commissioned officer or an NCO sword, be carried by a sergeant. This is used, this period of they call false Bushido. It is like they did in Nazi Germany. They're tapping into these cultural memories, almost this like mythology of what Bushido was. So again, these are the classic examples of that period of false Bushido.
Kevin, what would happen to these swords after the defeat of Japan in the Second World War?
When the American U.S. Army is an army of occupation and they're trying to establish a system of sort of democracy, a Western-style democracy, these swords are expected to be turned in by serving officers and NCOs, and they are to be destroyed. This will also include swords that belong to samurai families. So all katanas, all swords are being turned in. And so under this new clause called the Japanese art sword, they are able to save thousands of incredible examples of anything like from the 15th into the 17th century swords. And again, those swords, okay, will be the basis of some of the great sword collections that the state of Japan has now. So these swords here were for many years, again, as battle trophies, were considered to be outside that aspect of collection, but they tell their own story too. And in Japan, the older the sword, the Japanese government, they very much like to try to retrieve and bring these swords back home. Our katana that we have here, it would be really an amazing thing to see that repatriated back to Japan.
Thank you for allowing me to come along and see those today, Kevin. It's been quite something to be able to see that early an example of a katana, and then how they were later brought back up to and during the Second World War.
Oh, it's great to have you.
When we return from the break, I set my sights on a range of anti-submarine weapons. I'll go aboard a retired warship and visit the Naval Museum of Halifax. Anti-submarine weapons have undergone a number of advancements. I'm meeting with Rick Sanderson of the Naval Museum to discuss the evolution of forward-throwing weapons and how they progressed from spigot to rocket launch systems. I'll even see an example on the decks of HMCS Sackville. Rick, I was at the Sackville and didn't have you with me, and I was looking at the Hedgehog, and I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about how that works.
Sure. The Hedgehog was a replacement basically for the depth charge system. The Hedgehog was a forward-firing projectile, and there were 24 of them in an array, and they were about 35 pounds of explosive charge in them, 7-inch diameter, and the intention was that they could fire them and still keep sonar contact. Anti-submarine warfare at the beginning of the Second World War generally involved firing off depth charges, either from the sides of the ship or from the stern of the ship. This resulted in a great deal of noise in the water. There was loss of sonar connection with the target, and it usually involved about 15 minutes of the sea settling down again before you had the chance to reacquire the target. So the forward-throwing anti-submarine weapons, such as the Hedgehog, was developed so that you would not lose contact and the shot would go out in front of the ship, and then you would be able to continuously contact the submarine.
Rick, as with everything, time moves on, and it moved on from the Hedgehog. What came next?
Well, already during the use of the Hedgehog, development work was going on the Squid, which was a much larger bomb. So
Right.
we do have a sample of that over here on the grounds, and if you want to take a look at that, we'll go over.
Oh, I'd love to.
All right.
Rick, we've talked about the Hedgehog, but how was it that the Squid worked?
The Squid had a very different kind of basis for it. It's actually linked into a sonar system. So the sonar system would give the firing coordinates directly to the machine. Here in the example that we have, you can see basically it's a 12-inch caliber projectile. Each projectile had carried 200 pounds worth of explosive charge in it, and it was fired out from the tube by an explosive charge that was put into the base on the other side of this unit. The whole thing could be rotated side to side, and it could actually come flat so that you could load it.
So this represents quite a large technological advancement over the Hedgehog.
Yes, it certainly is. Yeah, very much so. The fact that they're forward launching means they can keep contact with the enemy submarine, and very effective. This produced one in probably about 5 kills.
Really?
With one of these. Yes, very, very effective.
What sort of timeline are we looking at here? Was this quite a few years after the introduction of the Hedgehog?
Not at all. The Hedgehog was introduced 1942, designed 42, introduced 43. By 43, they were already in the design phase for this, and these were being installed in Royal Navy ships in late 1944-45, and there were 10 Castle-class ships in Canadian Navy who had these installed towards the end of the war as well. And they were in use right through until 1962.
Really?
And the Hedgehogs, they overlapped with this weapon for about 3 years or so, and then the Hedgehogs were deleted and these took over in place of them.
Right. So Rick, I was wondering what's coming next in the development of this kind of weaponry.
This is the projectile that's found in the Limbo, which was, as you say, the next step in the evolution of forward-firing anti-submarine warfare.
How did this particular anti-submarine weaponry work?
It's basically a form of a depth charge. These were fired from a 3-tube unit, and they were fired ahead of the ship, and it would be predetermined what depth it would actually explode at, and it carried somewhere in the range of about 400 pounds of explosive chemical, and would fire about 275 yards in front of the ship.
Right. And this is sort of the end of the line for forward-throwing weaponry, is it not?
Pretty much, yeah, because by that point, there's a whole different kind of sonar ability that are coming in. So we're looking now at things that are way, way in the distance, and this simply would not be far enough.
Right. So what is it that's coming after this?
ASROC, A-S-R-O-C, which is an anti-submarine rocket.
Ah.
It took a little bit of digging, Sandy, but we do have photos of the ASROC, both as installed and firing.
Oh, I'm glad you found them, Rick.
This is HMCS Restigouche, and over here, ASROC installed, close up. ASROC deployed, and another view of it deployed.
So it's clearly a very different system we're looking at here.
Yes, it's a rocket-fired torpedo. Here you can see them installed towards the stern midpoint, actually. These were on a rotatable table. You can fire them off in 1s, 2s, 4s, whatever number that you want. But what happened with these was, there's the rocket being fired. Once it comes out of here, these wings will deploy. Canards they're called, right. So you can guide them to a certain extent, but they are not wire guided or radio controlled. Once you fire them, off they go. But when they get to the position where you've calculated where the submarine is, there's inertial guidance inside the rocket that will drop off the motor and deploy a parachute. Parachute drops torpedo into the water and looses the parachute, and off goes the torpedo.
Really?
Yep.
Huh.
So you can actually fire this thing off and be very close to the target submarine before they're ever aware that it's even there. Because these things, of course, are connected up to a very advanced sonar system that has already picked up the submarine. At quite a distance, these things will fire off something like 8 nautical miles.
Really?
So you're well out of harm's way when these things go.
Rick, I have to say, that's quite a remarkable
Yeah.
evolution of technology in such a
That's
short
amazing.
period.
Yeah, it really is. Well, war is one of the great drivers
Right.
of technological innovation for necessary causes, but you hope that these can be used for other things.
I have to say, when I first saw the hedgehog on the Sackville, I didn't think that it would be quite so complex and interesting a story as this.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Coming up next, I'll be at the Aviation Museum to examine a deadly V-1 flying bomb that is said to have been recovered during World War II by a famous Canadian author. Today at the Aviation Museum, Mark People is going to show me a lethal V-1 flying bomb that was secured by Captain Farley Mowat during World War II. Mowat played a vital role in forming the first Canadian War Museum collection team. The V-1 flying bomb was considered the crown jewel in the hunt for World War II artifacts. So Mark, I understand that you have a V-1 flying bomb here that's sort of not any old V-1 flying bomb. It has a connection to the beloved Canadian author Farley Mowat?
Yes, we do have a V-1 flying bomb. We're very fortunate to have it. It's a fairly unique exhibit. It came via the Army Museum at the Citadel, and we've restored it here, but it's part of an operation that Farley Mowat led in 1945 to go and retrieve German technology across Germany at the end of the Second World War. A V-1 flying bomb is a pilotless flying bomb that was created by the Germans in 1943 to launch and to drop on targets. In this particular case, they targeted London with it. Farley Mowat went out and collected various items of interest for the Canadian Army as part of a museum project. And it's our understanding that this V-1 was part of that collection of items that he recovered.
Mark, I think a lot of people probably know Farley Mowat a lot better for his novels than his wartime work and those few books he wrote about his war. What can you tell us about what he was doing overseas?
Well, Mowat had a fairly active wartime career. Obviously, he was in Sicily and ended up in Europe as an intelligence officer in 1945. At that point, they basically gave him the task under the 1st Canadian Army to go out and actually look for, they called it museum pieces, and he went out and actually looked for anything he could find, either technology, tanks, and various other things, including V-1s. So there was a major technology grab at that point, and obviously, because of the nature of the V-1s, they were obviously an item of interest. The V-1, once it hit its target, which in this case was London, would do significant damage. I think over 6,000 civilians were killed during the V-1 campaign, in addition to about 58,000 being injured from it as well. So significantly, it would be fairly tight area of blast, but it still would be a significant blast, and it would take out obviously a number of residences or buildings from its initial target point. You've got a gyro in here that's going to give you stability. That's been spun by this particular propeller. Is actually a timer. That's giving you a timing indication, and that's the whole heart of the system. So the gyro would stabilize it, and it would basically level it. This would count down to when it would cut the engine out, basically, and then cut the engine out, and then it would drop.
So Mark, when we talk about the jet propulsion system, is that bulbous piece on the top there?
Right, so it's called an Argus pulse jet. And how the pulse jet worked was that actually it was compressed air that actually fueled that engine, and it basically was sprayed in, ignited, and that's what gave that pulsating, that gave it that buzz bomb sound.
Really?
It was a noisy sound, and then that's why people called them doodle bugs, buzz bombs. That was the sort of acronyms they were calling them. Basically what happened was that they made the sound, but when the engine cut out, because obviously this time down on the propeller, that's when it went and dropped and then exploded. Once the engine stopped, it meant that the fuel was cut off and it was actually dropping on the target. So invariably you would hear the bomb coming, and then all of a sudden you'd hear it stop the engine, then you knew it was coming down, and then all of a sudden you'd have a number of seconds silence before that explosion.
Am I right that there was actually a pilot strapped to some of these?
Well, there are some manned versions, and one of the versions that Mowat actually got had a cockpit, rudimentary cockpit with a canopy, and a few of them had flown it. And that particular V1 is actually in the Canadian War Museum today.
We talk about how these were being launched from France across the English Channel, predominantly towards London. How were they actually getting off the ground, Mark? I mean, they obviously weren't taking off like an airplane.
No, they used large launch ramps, and the launch ramps were dotted across the French coastline, northern France coastline. And then the ramp used the steam catapult to launch the V1 along a sled with a piston attached to it. And it shot off, the piston dropped off, and the V1 reached a speed that it could take off. The engine's running at this point, and they had power, and they could literally wrap up to 3,000 feet and then head towards England.
Must have been quite a heck of a ride if you were one of the pilots on one of these things.
Well, yes. I mean, other German aircraft also there were a number of German aircraft that were rocket powered as well, too, to varying degrees of propulsion that they had. So it was something that they had experimented with certainly throughout the later part of the war.
Now, I have to say, Mark, I think the most interesting part of this story, certainly for me, is Mowat's role in that team, that museum's team. What other sort of things did they bring back with them, and what impact have they had on the evolution of military technology in Canada?
Well, interestingly enough, a number of German jet engines were collected, and early German jet engines that power the Messerschmitt 262. And a lot of those went to help research Canada's fledgling jet engine aircraft industry. I mean, they colloquially called all these things war prizes. That was kind of the description of what they were bringing back. And to some degree, they were either technology or they were actually just curiosity museum pieces. This is fairly cutting-edge technology for the time. I mean, it's the genesis of that drone pilotless aircraft is right here. I mean, this is, technology circa 1943-44, so it's certainly a big technological leap.
Well, I have to say, Mark, this has been really great to take a look at this rocket today and to sort of delve into that story that I think a lot of people wouldn't know about Farley Mowat, and I'm even encouraged to go and read some of those wartime books he wrote.
Well, I think obviously Mowat was a central figure in Canadian literature, and also his wartime exploits are certainly, luckily he recorded them for everyone to see and read.
Absolutely. Having special access to go beyond museum exhibits reveals some of history's best-kept secrets and most interesting stories. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of military artifacts on another episode of Militaria at the museum.